John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. The horrific fires in Southern California caught some people completely off guard. Some, not all. A 2023 documentary laid this all out in excruciating detail. A work 6 years in the making. Director, cinematographer Gabriel Mann will join me in a moment. But here is a scene from his masterpiece, Hotshot. And I was not prepared for what you are about to see.
You go direct to the fire's edge and rip the fuel out of its mouth. The aircraft are there to give the ground crews time to get in there and go direct. All the forces are conspiring to do one simple thing: separate the fire from its fuel. Paint it, wet it, cut it, and then rinse and repeat. The hose lays put in wet line to take the heat out. Dozers rip miles of fuel out of the ground. The hand crews get in the rough terrain and pick up spot fires. The tankers slow it down with retardant. But until you cut out the fuel, the fire's not out. Bare mineral soil, nothing left to burn. When you cut line by hand, you're at the mercy of the fire. You can only take so much heat. When it flares up, you have to bump out and wait for the copters to take some of the out of it. Then you dive back in and take another bite. You gotta get it early because once it gets established and gets some steam behind it, the helicopters can't keep you safe anymore. It'll run, and it'll run hard. When the winds and terrain get into alignment, the fire burns so fast it's on you before you can even blink. Hand crews can't do for this now. When you lose the fire, that's when things get ugly.
Gabriel Mann, the filmmaker behind Hotshot, joins me now. It's available on Amazon Prime Video. Thank you for being here. Your film is unbelievable, and you spent 6.5 years out there chasing down hotshots.
This is a very predictable cycle, and that's something that I learned in the 6 years that I was going to all these fires. And just so people are aware, it's not a traditional film. I used a press pass and exploited the liberal press laws in California that allow anybody with a press badge to go on any wildfire that they want, unabated. And I just grabbed a camera and I walked in. And the thing that I observed is you see the same patterns repeating themselves over and over and over. And it gets to the point where you start to question why people aren't noticing this, especially in fire country out west, where you see these same fires in the same areas every few years, and that fuel grows back, and then you're just like watching this ticking time bomb. It's pretty devastating to watch history repeat itself over and over.
Gabriel, when this fire broke out in California, this is a couple of years after the film came out, what did you think? I mean, that's your home. You grew up in that area, right?
Yeah, I was raised in the Palisades. My aunt lost everything. My cousins lost everything in that fire. Look, I'd been warning people for years that that place was a death trap. You know, all the way through Topanga Canyon and Malibu Canyon. That is Fire Alley. That is where those Santa Ana winds that we all know about, that's where they get channeled. And unfortunately, because of the coastal influence, you get so much vegetation growing out there. And of course, vegetation is wildfire fuel. The more it grows, the bigger the bomb. When you get that inevitable spark, and it is inevitable, it's going to happen, the more vegetation that you have, the worse it's going to get. And unfortunately, everything came into alignment pretty perfectly. And it was, frankly, it was worse than even I was predicting, just because the winds were so awful. But, you know, another factor to this is once those homes start going, they're so tightly packed with winds like that, just like with Maui. It kind of stopped being a wildfire and it just became this urban conflagration. I've been on a lot of those. Once that first domino falls in the neighborhood, it's almost impossible to stop it.
Gabriel, I want to roll another clip from the film Hotshot, your documentary. I think this illustrates exactly what you were just talking about.
Medicinal fire reduces wildfire destruction by 87%. Over the last several decades, despite knowing the consequences, government bureaucrats have managed only to reduce the amount of medicinal burning in California. And the predictable results are at hand. Every year they make voluntary, non-binding pacts to burn more. But are they actually doing it? Of course not. Florida proactively burns more in 1 year than California has burned in the last 50 years. And guess which state has a wildfire problem? The natural burn rate in California is between 4 and 11 million acres every year. And because California has only been paying around 3% of its fire debt every year, in order to restore a balanced ecosystem, they have to burn 20 million acres right now. The California Air Resources Board has veto power over all firing operations because they don't want urban city dwellers to be inconvenienced by the smell of smoke. Well, kids, you're gonna get it anyway. The smoke from a firing operation is a fraction of the density of the smoke from a raging wildfire, and it doesn't have all the chemicals from all the cars and homes that get burned up. Fire is medicine. Our ancestors knew this. Just like their native forebears, hotshots love to burn. There's an art to putting black line on the map. They paint with fire, stripes to build more heat, flares and bombs to get more depth and suck the fire in on itself. Burn shows are a thing of beauty. If you burn around your community, you're immune from wildfire. Mother Nature is going to take that carbon from us whether we like it or not. And the harder we fight it, the worse it gets. Because if you don't burn it like this, Mama's going to burn it like this.
Gabriel Mann, the filmmaker behind Hotshot, joins me on Newsmaker. Your access to these crews was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. But having covered some fires out in California in my career, you're right about the rules out there are incredibly lax. Journalists have free rein. Here in Arizona, you can't get up in this stuff. It's really difficult.
Yeah, it's very unique, and that's why so much of the film takes place in California, because I had a mantra when I was making this film, which is show, don't tell. I kind of get tired of these talking head documentaries where you have someone describing some incredible scenario. You have a firefighter describing a 1,000-foot fire tornado or having to drive through flames on both sides of the road. I really wanted to go and see it and show it and really give the audience a sense of that power of extreme fire behavior, because it really is captivating, and it's hard to really appreciate what these firefighters go through until you see it for yourself. And look, man, I had some very close calls over the years, and it was quite dangerous, but I did all the same training that the Hotshots do. I took all their same courses. I had all the same gear that they had. I took it very seriously, and I was actually pretty conservative, but the thing is, these fires are they're getting so nasty that it's hard to stay safe out there at this point.
Gabriel, just your take on what happened in California. And I posted, having covered some of these and some limited knowledge about how this works. I said, look, if you've got 95-mile-an-hour winds sweeping downhill with a big fire, there is no stopping it. There is no amount of water, retardant, anything that's going to stop that. Do you share that view?
100%. You have it dead on, and this is one of the frustrating things about how the narrative has been unfolding. And look, there are certainly politicians and people who need to be held accountable for mistakes, but I would argue that the politicians in California have let down Californians before the fire even came. So we're talking, in the months and years leading up to this fire, by not removing that threat in the surrounding area. Once you get conditions like that, people need to understand, and I've been on a lot of fires where I've watched multiple engines just shooting water on a house, even when just the corner of the eaves or the deck is on fire, and you cannot put that thing out. I don't think people really appreciate just how powerful this force of nature really is once it gets going, especially with extreme conditions like that. I know that there's a lot of criticism about the fire hydrants, but the thing that people need to understand is this is actually very common on these massive urban conflagrations. I've seen hydrants run dry on multiple fires, because one of the things that happens when you have 500 homes getting leveled, all those plumbing fixtures in the homes are now severed, and so their water is gushing out of every single outlet at full tilt. So now imagine 5,000 homes with all of their water main just shooting out all at once. How much that is going to reduce pressure to these fire hydrants. They simply can't keep up. Now, look, it's January. We normally don't see fires this late, even though, you know, the conditions that you need for fire are real simple. You just need dry brush and an ignition, and that's what we had. But I can't blame anybody for thinking, all right, if we got to repair a reservoir, let's do it in January. Unfortunately, the timing really didn't work out, but ultimately, like you said, once the fire gets going like this, there is no stopping it until it runs out of fuel. And I was cautioning everybody, this thing's running all the way to the ocean. That's the only thing that's going to stop it.
It's very similar to the fire in Lahaina. It's almost identical conditions. Ignition source may be different, but the result the same.
Yeah, and we'll find out what the ignition source is. I'm sure the fire investigators actually already know. They're really good about keeping this close to the vest. But in Lahaina, it was power lines that started a small brush fire. But once it transitioned into that urban interface, frankly, it wouldn't have mattered if maybe that first home on the block caught fire for some reason. If it started as a structure fire, like I said before, once these dominoes start falling, it's almost impossible in those conditions to stop it. And frankly, once the homes become the fuel, it gets so much worse because, you know, brush will burn through relatively quickly. It takes maybe a minute or so, and it's all done. Homes will burn for hours and hours and hours, so they continue sending off all those embers and those firebrands. They're going to keep sending it downrange and knock out everything. It's almost impossible to stop an urban conflagration like that.
Gabriel, thanks again. I want to run clip number 3 from your film, because this gets into the whole debate on whether 1.2 degrees of warming in the last 150 years is responsible for what happened in California. Take a look.
Australia had far bigger fires back in 83, at 75, 67, and for centuries prior. In the 1700s, Captain Cook's nickname for Australia was the continent of smoke. I wonder why. The only difference between then and now is that before, there were no cell phone cameras in the middle of the outback, so you didn't see it. Global wildfire activity is actually decreasing. It's only getting worse in the areas that practice aggressive fire suppression, like the American West. But few are eager to tell you the truth. Instead, they tell you the sky is falling like never before, and it's all the fault of our modern climate. When was the climate not? Was there some magical time in history when droughts didn't exist? When do they think the ideal climate was? 30 years ago? Back in 1991? When the Oakland firestorm killed 25 people and destroyed nearly 3,000 homes and did $2.5 billion of damage in a day? Maybe the ideal climate was 100 years ago, when we didn't have all the pollution and power plants. Back in 1910? When the big blow-up burned 3 million acres across 2 countries in a weekend and killed 86 people? Or was the climate optimum even further back? Way back when the population of the Earth was less than 1 billion people. Less consumers, no SUVs, and hardly a whiff of CO2 in the air. Like in 1871, when the worst wildfire in recorded human history, the Peshtigo Fire, in Wisconsin burned over 1 million acres in a few hours and vaporized more than 2,000 people. They don't even know the death toll within plus or minus 1,000. And the people who fled for refuge in the Peshtigo River boiled alive. And that wasn't even the biggest fire that year. Hell, it wasn't even the biggest fire on that day. The same day, the Great Michigan Fire burned 3 million acres alone. In 2020, California had its biggest fire year in history, with people panicking over the consumption over 4 million acres of vegetation. But in 1871, those 2 fires alone burned more in a single day than California did in the entirety of its worst year. And neither of those 2 fires even have a place in history, because the Great Fire of Chicago ignited on the same damn day. 1871 was a hell of a year. People would tell you that the climate in the 1800s was way better than it is today. Yet the horrific fires in the late 19th century made our current fires look like birthday candles. It was largely because the logging operations of the dominant timber companies. had left a cluttered forest floor brimming with desiccated slash piles. The dead biomass built up and became a ticking time bomb. Sound familiar? But who has any incentive to actually learn their fire history and tell you the truth? The policy of fire suppression was first conceived as a tool to protect profits for big business, and it's no different today. Everyone is all in on the wildfire industrial complex. Everyone wants more. More firefighters, more aircraft, more dozers, more retardant, more chainsaws, more. Every year the effort swells, on your dime. And the beauty of it all is that the more aggressively they suppress the fires, the bigger the fires get. And the bigger the fires get, the more budget they need to suppress them. It's a positive feedback loop, when all you had to do was clear your brush. On the Silverado fire in 2020, the fire weather conditions were so extreme, fire was shooting out of the sewers. 85-mile-per-hour winds, among the highest winds ever to surface over a fire in California, sent heavy fire racing down towards the uber-wealthy community of Orchard Hills, massive flames threatening the multi-million-dollar homes. But the firefighters didn't even have to pull out their hoses. They just grabbed garden hoses from people's yards and tried to not fall asleep as they watched the fire hit the 300-foot greenbelt of mulch and succulents surrounding the community. And it took the out of the once raging inferno, and it fell weak and whimpering at their feet. The firefight was intense. Disappointed with the lack of action, the fire pornographers, who outnumbered the firefighters 5-1, were relegated to scrambling for desperate shots of firefighters squirting some water on an ornamental tree that caught an ember.
Gabriel Mann, filmmaker behind Hotshot, joins me. That part of the film is so powerful because this Silverado fire in 2020 and what happened in that neighborhood, unbelievable. The 300-foot greenbelt, is that kind of what you're saying is the key to stopping this stuff?
100%. And I mean, again, it's so tragic to watch this unfold, especially when you've seen a fire just like this before. This is part of what's so frustrating whenever I hear the media call things unprecedented. There's nothing unprecedented about anything that we're seeing. And once you learn your fire history, it all starts to unlock. And that fire in particular, the Silverado fire back in 2020, we saw very similar conditions. We had 85-mile-per-hour winds, and this was at the peak of that 2020 season, which was the worst in California's history. So resources were all spread out. It was a total mess. But that fire hit this green belt of succulents and mulch and things that don't really burn. And yeah, a few palm trees in the neighborhood caught a few embers, but the thing is, because the fire stopped so much farther back from the community, you're reducing the amount of embers that are flying in there, and you can actually manage it. The Palisades, on the other hand, if you look at the Google Map images of the neighborhood, especially around the edges where there was the most destruction, you've got 12-foot tall scrub oak growing right up against these homes. And it's so tragic to see because you see these examples like in Orange County where they managed to hold off this fire without any firefighters having to actually fight fire. It's just good landscaping, good urban planning. So to see something that could be remedied with just, a couple of crews and a bulldozer and some landscapers, and it could have saved all this destruction, it's really maddening to watch.
So Gabriel, why don't the politicians and the locals push this really hard to prevent exactly what we saw in California, in Lahaina, et cetera?
Well, there's a huge challenge in that there's a gap in education, and the media is failing the people of California tremendously because they continue to put everything on climate change. Now, look, we don't even really get into it. As you can see in that clip, we kind of dodged the climate change thing because I was trying to give the perspective of the hotshots and how they feel about these things and trying to reflect their view of the fire world. They don't care about climate change because they know their fire history. They know that no matter what the climate has done, there's always been wildfires. And they understand that CO2 isn't the control knob for it, but vegetation is the control knob for it. So because they understood this, I wanted to try to convey that The problem with the media is that they will tell everybody that something's unprecedented. And we've already forgotten the Woolsey fire, which burned in the same area in Malibu back in 2018. A perfect example of this is back in 1993, Sean Penn lost his mansion in Malibu to the Malibu fires, same year as the fires down in Laguna.
I covered that. I covered the Laguna fire. Yep.
You remember how bad
Same
93
thing.
was.
Yep.
But the thing is, Sean Penn, he rebuilt in Malibu, and then in 2008, he lost a trailer on his home, and then in 2018, he had to evacuate, nearly lost his home again. But he continues to blame SUVs. He blames you for your consumption. But he doesn't ever stop to think about where he's building his home in Fire Alley. And that's what's so frustrating when the media lies and tells you that something's unprecedented, and especially when they put it on something that's really nebulous, that we can't change. Look, we are in an interglacial period. The climate is going to continue to fluctuate, and it's going to trend towards warmer. That could bring more rain. It could bring more Santa Anas. You can't predict this stuff. The one thing that we do know is when you've got fuels coming out of the ground, it's going to burn eventually. So when you put something on the angry weather, something that we ain't going to change anytime soon, you're disempowering everybody. You're removing everybody's agency to solve the problem. If you want to solve a problem, you have to accept that you have agency over it. And it's very frustrating to see that, look, no matter what you think about climate change and the solutions or the perceived solutions like electric cars and solar panels, none of those will have an impact on fire behavior at all.
That is
right?
absolutely
if you
right.
do those things,
Yep.
outstanding. Please do it. Just understand it won't impact wildfire. The only thing that's going to help is getting rid of that brush.
Yeah, because any of the changes that you just described would not take hold quickly enough to stop this issue. So
Correct.
you've got to do mitigation. That strikes me as the ultimate solution, and you got to do it beforehand.
Yep. And Florida does this very well. I mean, we pointed this out in the film, how Florida will proactively burn 2 million acres every single year, whereas California is only doing about 30,000 acres. And people think, well, Florida gets a lot of rain, they don't have wildfires. People have no clue just how flammable Florida really is. All that rain produces more fuels. And the hurricanes actually make it worse because when you get a hurricane, you get a bunch of dead and downed trees. They're now disconnected from their water source. So that's just firewood laying everywhere. And back in the 90s, Florida had a huge wildfire outbreak where they had 500,000 acres of wildfire, wiped out a bunch of homes, wiped out their timber industry, killed some people. And obviously that's a very expensive catastrophe. And so they had a very rational approach to that. They said, well, how much did it cost for us to have 500,000 acres of wildfire? And how much would it cost for us to proactively burn 500,000 acres? And with the cost of just one devastating wildfire season, they could afford to burn 500,000 acres for 60 years and prevent it from ever happening. So they decided, all right, that makes sense, let's do that. And ever since, they've been burning millions of acres every single year. And they're very proactive about it, whereas Californians, they just can't seem to get it together. The residents are really afraid of fire. They do not see it for the beneficial force that it really is. They also don't like smoke.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem.
Yep.
They do not want to breathe smoke. And the thing that I always have to implore people about is the smoke from a wildfire is exponentially worse. You cannot avoid smoke. So you get to choose. You want to
Pay
do
me
it on
now
your
or pay me
terms, when
later.
it's just a prescribed burn,
Yep.
or do you want to do it with cars and homes going up and breathing in all those chemicals?
When we left on the last segment on Newsmaker, we were talking about kind of this blanket immunity for everybody, talking about climate change. My point about that has been, if you believe that that's the cause of this, then you've already accepted that you've got a problem. You better deal with it, because you're not going to stop it with electrified cars, changing the grid, windmills and solar panels. That's not going to change the conditions on the ground right now.
That is 100% accurate. I wish everybody had that pragmatic mindset about this. Again, what's frustrating to me is that no matter how you feel about climate change, whether you're a climate change skeptic or you're a climate change activist, these things aren't mutually exclusive when it comes to wildfire. Wildfire needs to be divorced from this issue because there are so many other factors at play and factors that we can control. So when it comes to wildfire, we have to look at what causes it. And there's three things that you need, three ingredients that you need for a wildfire: drought, fuels, and ignition. Now, we get drought every year in the form of summer, where you get all these hot months and you get this rain, the lack of rain, and so the moisture from the fuels dries out. Here's the thing. Out of those three things, the drought, the fuels, and the ignitions, we can't change the weather. We can't stop every ignition. Try as we might, bad things happen. Power lines go down, cars catch on fire, people make mistakes, you have arsonists. And then in 2020, all those fires were lightning. We're never going to be able to stop that. The one thing that we can control is the fuels. We can get rid of them. So the idea that we would only focus on ignitions and weather in that fire triangle, the two things that we cannot control or cannot eliminate completely, instead of the one thing that we can control, it's maddening. And all you have to do is look at what hotshots do on an active wildfire. How do they stop the fire?
Fire.
They don't. Exactly. They burn it and they get rid of the fuels the best way that they can.
Yeah.
That's all. That's literally all they do is get rid of fuels. They don't use water. They don't use electric vehicles. They don't try to change the weather. They just get rid of fuels. If we do that preemptively, there's no reason why we shouldn't.
Yeah, there you go. Gabriel, since you grew up there, I just want to get your take on this, because we have been in this cycle in California. It burns, we build it back. It burns again, we build it back. Do you think that that area, Pacific Palisades, Malibu, wherever you want to go, where we had fires, do you think those communities will look the same on this next go around?
I sure hope not, because obviously it's unsustainable. I think this was a big enough incident that people are going to at least change the way that they build things and maybe fireproof their homes a little bit better. But again, if we don't treat that perimeter of the neighborhood, you're going to keep running into the same problem. There's a steep price that you pay for having a nice view. If your street name has the word view in it, or vista, or mountain, you are in danger of getting wrecked by a wildfire, because that means you are on top of a slope surrounded by vegetation. If you don't address that, it almost doesn't matter what you do. So moving forward, look, I don't know what's going to happen. What I do know is that we keep having these tragedies in California and they never change anything. So there's this cynical part of me that, looking at history, I actually can't fathom that they will change anything. I want to believe that. But back in 2018, we had 85 people killed in the fire in Paradise. Nothing changed. We didn't suddenly start burning off and doing our prescribed burns. We didn't change how we build our communities. Nothing's changed. I don't know what it's going to take, frankly. But unfortunately, too many people are either incentivized or disincentivized to see the fires go away. The media loves these fires. They make a ton of money off of it. Imagine how much money all the builders and the contractors are going to make in an area that was untouchable. Now all of a sudden you're going to have 5,000 new structures going up. There's a lot of perverse incentives that sort of keep change from ever happening in California. It's very frustrating to watch.
And Gabriel, we've gotten into a cycle now where it's all about suppression. And suppression will lead to more and bigger fires, sadly. You can save structures maybe if you get it early. We see this in Arizona. All of the effort is basically on saving structures and property. That's where it all goes. They're even sending out the tankers now early to try to put out stuff around a structure. They're hitting it early to save it. We've spent a lot of money on this, and I'm not sure exactly what we're getting.
Yeah, look, you have this natural permanent part of the ecosystem. It's nature's cleaning crew. The more fuels you have growing out of the ground, the more you need that fire and the more it's inevitable. And we're trying to suppress this. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. And the more you push it down, the more difficult it gets to keep it down, and the more explosively it's eventually going to come back up. So if we continue suppressing this natural system, then it's just going to get more explosive. And unfortunately, we've put ourselves into this position where we're kind of rimrocked. We've gotten so good at stopping these fires, there's just too much fuel left standing because it hasn't had a chance to burn. And so now what happens is it's kind of too dangerous to get rid of it now. And we have to stop the fires. That's why in the film I talk about it being a positive feedback loop where we're kind of rimrocked. What I would like to see is when you do have one of these catastrophic fires, this is a great opportunity to say, all right, we just reset the Etch-a-Sketch. Now let's do it right from here on out.
Yeah.
Because the growth that you get over the next couple of years, it's going to be light enough that you can get rid of it early with small-scale RX burns, and then you no longer have that excuse where a community's been sitting in it for 40 years, and now it is too dangerous to let fire move through there. We have to stop it. We need to break that cycle. But like I said, these communities, frankly, after they have a big fire, they don't reset and start doing it right. I'm not sure what's missing, and it's been very frustrating because I have this, this documentary that tries to lay this out, and I feel like no one's really absorbing it. And I'm not sure what the missing link is. My only hope is that it is finally bad enough that people will not tolerate this anymore.
Well, and the insurance companies aren't tolerating it, that's for sure. I want to roll clip 4 from your film, Hotshot. And I think this is so illustrative of what we're talking about. Take a look.
No amount of water can stop a wildfire when it gets established like this. It starts burning so hot the water vaporizes before it even hits the fuel. Your only hope is to try and slow it down. You try to leverage the freeway as a fire break and keep it from jumping into the next bed of fuel. But once the wind bites it, you're in trouble. There's no more fighting it. Extreme fire behavior is the most powerful force of nature on Earth. It mocks our machinery. It's like in the ocean. No matter what you throw on it, you're not going to stop it. She's gone. You can feel it when you've lost the fire. When the smoke column begins to rotate like this, that's when you know you're in trouble. The fire is creating its own weather now, sucking in everything around it, igniting it, and spitting it back out, throwing spot fires all around you. The spots get established out ahead of you so fast that before you can even blink, you're surrounded by fire.
Oh, man. Gabriel, when I watched that, how close did you come to problems? Big problems.
Well, that was my Jeep that I was filming from in that scene. So I got very close. It just, look, it's a testament to just how powerful nature is and how powerful extreme fire behavior is. And the film is largely about the hubris of man, thinking that we can tame this force of nature, and that I had this whole opening sequence of just shut down freeways in Los Angeles because, I mean, that is the most iconic symbol of man conquering nature, right? These 18-lane behemoths carving through the wildlands in California, and all of the commerce and industry that flows through these arteries in California, and they're completely brought to a standstill because of one little spark. And it's just a reminder that as much as we think we can control this natural world, she's got a few tricks up her sleeve.
Yeah.
And when you see a fire really get going, there really is no stopping it. That's why it's so important to, assist this natural process, not try to fight it, because you can't. So maybe you'll get lucky on a few small fires, you'll be able to stop them, or you'll be able to limit the damage. But when you get these massive fires that we're starting to see because we've got too much fuel growing, there is no stopping it. And that's the one thing that people need to keep in mind about the Palisades fire in particular. There's a lot of criticism of the fire agencies, but I'm telling you, man, been in a lot of these. There's no stopping it once it gets like that.
Could you talk for a minute about the difference between the wildland firefighters and the urban or our traditional fire departments? The fire departments can do very little on something like this, right?
Yeah, 100%. So wildland firefighters, especially the U.S. Forest Service wildland firefighters who I covered in this film, they have a different mission. And they're good at different things, right? So traditional municipal firefighters, the ones that we think of when we think firefighter, they got mustaches, they drive those big red trucks, they're going to structure fires and they're spraying water on things. Wildland firefighters, they have a completely different kind of fitness, right? They're not gonna be pulling grandma out of a building and running hose lays upstairs. They're gonna be hiking deep into the wilderness and cutting fire line by hand. So it's a different kind of technical skill. They have to be able to cut down trees. They need to be able to do large-scale firing operations. So when the wildland interfaces with that urban interface, that's where you get this confluence of these resources where now the municipal guys are going to be taking over the structure component. The wildland guys are going to be up in the brush trying to cut line and trying to contain this thing from getting too much bigger. But ultimately, that water can only do so much. That's why it's so important to try to tackle the wildfire out in the wildlands and get rid of that brush. The hotshots, who are the most elite firefighters in the arsenal, they're the most well-trained, they have the most experience, they face the most dangerous circumstances. All they do is get rid of fuels. And so I think that should be a lesson to everybody. If you want to prevent these fires, you've got to get rid of the fuels.
And they're on a completely different pay structure. And some of them are prison crews. We saw that in the Dude fire in Arizona. On all these fires, you've got prison crews out there. You've got them in LA as well. And we lost a crew from Perryville Prison in the Dude fire here in 1990. And then, of course, we had hotshots killed in the Granite Mountain incident.
Yeah, and hotshots in particular, working for the U.S. Forest Service, they're not even classified as firefighters. There's this bureaucratic loophole that classifies them as forestry technicians. Nobody has been able to explain what in the heck that is, but it allows them to get them to do firefighter duties without paying them like firefighters. This is something that has been an issue for years, and frankly, we thought that after the Granite Mountain tragedy, things would change. We would recognize just how dangerous this job is and just how vital these firefighters are and start treating them better. But frankly, nothing has changed. It was very upsetting because I remember, former President Joe Biden, back when he was vice president, he gave a speech at the memorial and he said, we are going to take care of you guys.
Yeah.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed, for the rest of his tenure as vice president. Nothing changed during his presidency. And right now, Congress is set to cut their pay in half. And we've already lost about 40% of the U.S. Forest Service wildland firefighting workforce over the last few years because the injection mandates were a big deal, and then the low pay and the poor treatment. We're about to lose even more. So a lot of crews have lost their status because they can't retain guys. They keep hemorrhaging guys to these municipal agencies and CAL FIRE, and it's becoming a serious problem. And at this point, the thing that I try to remind people is that look how vulnerable we are. I think at this point, wildfire is the biggest threat to our country. There's no easier way to get rid of 5,000 homes with just dropping a road flare in the right place on the wrong day. You can do so much damage with just one little spark, and it just shows you that this vulnerability needs to be closed because any bad actor could go out there and destroy entire communities, kill a bunch of people, and what we're doing to react to that is we're not paying wildland firefighters to seal up this gap in our security. I think it's crazy. And when you look at California, half the acreage that burned in the entire fire season last year was due to arson. It's a very serious threat to our country. We need to take it more seriously.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you, because I know that you are well-sourced in this world. Do you worry that some of this in California may have been intentional, that we really may have had, whether it was a single person or a planned act? Is this something that worries you?
Yeah, it's a huge concern. Now, the thing is, typically what we've seen with arson in California, especially over these last few years, it's crazy people. But what would stop anyone with a road flare to just, if they wanted to take out an entire community, they could do it like that. So we have to be very concerned about bad actors leveraging this vulnerability to do immense amounts of damage. Now, the thing is, with wind-driven fires, you tend to see they're often caused by power lines, because the same winds that would push that fire, they're kicking things up into power lines, sparks fly. One of the fires, the Eaton fire that moved through Altadena, that seems to have been caused by power lines. But we still don't quite know what hit the Palisades. It could have been power lines, but it could have also been human caused. Again, maybe it's just a crazy person. Maybe it was an accident. These things do happen, but we are so vulnerable. I keep trying to sound the alarm. It really doesn't take much. And I share a lot of people's concern that some bad actors could easily do insane amounts of damage with just one tiny little spark.
Gabriel, finally, we'll wrap up. You've been very generous with your time. We're speaking to Gabriel Mann, who is the cinematographer, director of Hotshot. It is so good. I really recommend it on Amazon Prime. It's a masterpiece in this area. For people who watch this, what do you want them to take away? What is the overarching thesis of your film?
Well, I would say the overarching thesis is humility in the face of nature. But I think the most urgent takeaway at this point, because that can be sort of an esoteric kind of theme, the most urgent thing is to take care of our human resources and take care of our wildland firefighters, because the amount of damage that's done by putting these people in harm's way, sending them out there to fight these fires, they have to witness death and destruction amongst their crew as well. They go to way too many funerals, and they're not getting paid enough. They're not being taken care of. We cannot do any of the work that we need to do with clearing brush, preventing these fires, without those humans. We cannot nerd our way out of this. There is not going to be a tech solution that solves this very analog problem of combustion. We need to shore up our wildland firefighting workforce. People need to call Congress, call their representatives, implore that they vote yes on the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act. That is what's going to secure funding so we can pay our firefighters what they deserve. If that does not pass, we're going to lose at least half of our workforce. It's going to be a bloodbath. And I think that is the most important thing, because none of the work that we talk about getting done, like all the prescribed fire, removing fuels, none of it can get done if these dudes go away. So that's probably the most urgent takeaway.
Gabriel Mann, Hotshot is just a great piece of work. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Gabriel.